Welcome back to another episode of the Ecom Growth Show. I'm your host, Danon Coleman. With me, I've got David Miller from Damn Law. I said that right, David?
That's right.
All right, cool. So, David Allen Miller Law. So he's an attorney. Actually, David, lawyer, attorney. What's the difference? Which are you? I actually don't know.
There's no difference there. They're totally
Okay.
changeable. Some people think that they are, but same exact thing. So I'm both.
All right, sweet. Law attorney it is. All right. So David is a lawyer in the Amazon space and specifically helps sellers just like us for all the crap that we go through. So David, I want to go into a series of questions that I think that the listeners are going to find extremely insightful. I can't speak today. Sorry. I think my wife didn't give me caffeine, but so we're going to go into suspensions. We're going to go into money, IP complaints, private label versus reselling. But first, if you could, please introduce yourself. Give us a little bit about your history. How did you end up in the Amazon sector, and what do you do now? So what, like, I could refer to you as a lawyer, but there's business law, there's real estate law. Where are you on all of this, and what are all the things you do?
Sure. So first off, thanks for having me. I'll start with how I got into this. Went to law school like every other kid, in my early to mid 20s, and just started gathering some intellectual property experience. Worked at an intellectual property law firm, like right out of law school. Got some experience. And Amazon was, I don't want to say on the rise, but it was booming, right? I mean, Amazon's been, I think it's existed since the mid 90s, but it really started booming maybe mid 2000s or so. And there were more and more resellers. It was insane, the amount of cases and issues that, I was dealing with. A lot of them were on the Amazon side of things. So in addition to my IP background, I started gathering a lot of knowledge on Amazon, and there's not that many attorneys that, let's call it, specialize or really are very Amazon focused, right? Because sometimes that's
Right.
the issue. It's a lot of intellectual.
Yeah, I literally know 3.
Yeah, there you go. So there's not too many of us. There's more now than there was, about 10 years ago or so, but there's very specific things, very specific rules. There's the intellectual property law side, there's business law, and then there's Amazon compliance. There's do's and don'ts of just Amazon, how Amazon operates, what specific things that Amazon will tell you, and what they actually mean. Sometimes certain issues will come up. Amazon won't tell you exactly what it means, but if you've done it for long enough and you kind of speak Amazonese, as we call it, then it's a bit easier to to decode, if you will. So that's a little bit about my background. And as far as now, what we generally do, so my firm, we assist Amazon sellers. So 50%, I believe it is, on the Amazon platform. About half the time when a buyer purchases an item on Amazon, it's coming from an Amazon reseller or an Amazon third party, whether they're private label or in the reselling model. So we represent those small to medium to pretty large businesses, depending on who the particular client is. We really assist them with navigating the murky waters of Amazon and e-commerce. It can be a variety of different issues. We've helped with, on the compliance side, if an Amazon account was suspended, those are some of the nightmare scenarios that we deal with. Sometimes it's an intellectual property battle where party one files a trademark, a copyright, a patent, or a counterfeit accusation against another party. We've been on both sides as far as enforcing IP and defending it. And there's a slew of additional, other programs that Amazon has, such as Apex when it's patent disputes. We've helped recover funds sometimes in those nightmare account suspension scenarios. Amazon also withholds money. And anyone who's been selling on Amazon for a certain amount of time probably knows that you sign your right away. So you can't file a lawsuit against Amazon as a seller. You have to go to arbitration. So we've helped with arbitrations. And we've also helped sellers even sell their entire Amazon businesses. So again, we're a heavily Amazon-focused firm. Those are some of the things we do. I mean, I could go on it.
Yeah, well, hey, look, I think that if nothing else, that is going to help an Amazon seller feel a little bit better about coming to you, because They're not just going to a general business lawyer who needs, as a brand isn't just going to a general business lawyer for help with Amazon related items, right? Like you have experience, and you have how many years experience dealing with Amazon stuff?
It's close to a decade now.
Yeah. So for lack of a better term, at this point, you know your shit, or at least you certainly should.
Yep. Yeah.
You've probably got enough experience.
Yeah. So it's funny because the Amazon platform has changed so much over time. Close to 10 years ago, you could borderline get away with murder on Amazon. You pretty much anything. One example.
That's not legal advice, folks.
Yeah. One topic in particular was drop shipping in 2016, 2017. There were so many making a boatload of money. Most of them are not selling on Amazon anymore because they violate Amazon policy, and a lot of them are just, onto different things. So it changed a lot, and that's something I think we'll also cover today, how it's changed.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. Now, do you, and I've never needed a lawyer for Amazon. Well, I take that back. One time I did, and I didn't use a lawyer, and so it cost me 4 months of being suspended, right? Whereas I probably could have gotten it back in, well, who knows how long, but a lot faster had I had a lawyer go to Amazon and just say, hey, there's nothing wrong with this account. There's no performance notifications, no nothing. You need to reinstate it. But when do I come to you? And actually, could I have you on retainer?
So 2 good questions. The first question, I would say only you can really answer that. It depends on what the circumstances are. I usually recommend trying to resolve it on your own if it's within reason, right? You're not going to fight, or you probably shouldn't fight, a utility patent infringement accusation on your own. They're pretty complex. There's a reason why a lot of attorneys at the top, when they write opinion letters on them, that basically says, we don't really know for sure. It depends on what a judge would say, but this is what we think, because it's very convoluted, very complex. So for something like that, probably a good idea. But of course, there has to be enough money at issue. If you sold 3 units over a period of 6 months, you don't need an attorney. You could just stop selling the product. I'm talking about if it's a specific Amazon issue. Account suspensions, things like that, I think you can try on your own as a seller, but you just have to be careful. And there's a lot of free content out there. We have our own channel as well. We talk about
you do
issues. We do, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what is that channel?
It's at David Miller E-commerce Lawyer. Let me just double check, make sure that's the exact handle.
Yeah.
Yeah. 2 different channels. Yep. David Miller E-commerce Lawyer. So we talk about these kinds of things. One thing you want to be careful of as a seller is you don't want to cause more harm than good, right? So if you write to them, you have to understand that Amazon can use that against you down the road. So for example, if you're trying to appeal an account suspension and Amazon's withholding $100,000, if you say something that's not truthful and we end up going to arbitration, Amazon's attorneys are going to use that information against you. So you do have to be careful with what you do provide and what you don't. So I think if you know that going in, you want to be somewhat careful. You can always have a free consultation, get some advice before. But I think it also depends on how large the business is, how, significant the issue is. If you've been in business a month, good chance you don't have enough skin in the game to hire an attorney. If you've been on Amazon selling for 10 years and you're doing 7-8 figures a year, probably a good idea, I would say.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, good. And so let's go into the second question.
Yes.
Do you have a retainer?
Yep. We offer flat fees and hourly retainers. So flat fees are just for simple, not always simple, but single issues. Hourly retainers are more long-term. So businesses that need more consistent help, or sometimes it's not consistent, but they want to have a law firm behind them for answering any questions about maybe it's their next business move. Maybe they have a random issue that pops up, or just general advice. It varies, but we do offer that.
Okay, cool. And because I know that this is a factor for all of us that have gotten more sophisticated in our Amazon sales, do you offer, well, actually, let me back up. What kind of lawyer are you? Because I don't know the differences. So this is actually good. Like, I'm willing to take the heat on being completely ignorant on all this stuff. What kind of lawyer are you?
I love it. So I would categorize myself as an IP lawyer, intellectual property lawyer focused, and business lawyer. So IP and business lawyer focused
Okay.
on Amazon. So it's a specific niche under the business and IP umbrella.
Okay, sweet. So my next question was going to be, could I come to you for general business law?
Yes, we offer that as well. So it's a range, right? So for the most part, it's you can't be a jack of all trades necessarily, right? Usually if you are, you're probably a master of none. So our focus is Amazon. So if you're an e-com seller, then, we give business related advice to e-com sellers. Outside of that, yes, we offer traditional legal services as well. Obviously, there's a lot of attorneys that do that. So we're less focused on it. But yeah, we do offer traditional legal advice as well.
And then let's just say someone was using you and they needed help with some other sector of law that you don't offer. I imagine that you have a network of people that you could refer them to that you trust.
Of course, of course. So
Sweet.
we usually begin with seeing if something we can assist with. If we don't think it's in our wheelhouse, we'll refer it out depending on what the need is. If it's litigation in a different state, if it's tax related, we're pretty selective and careful with what we choose to take on. But we do have
Of
hourly.
course.
Sometimes we have to refer out if it's outside our wheelhouse.
Cool. Yeah. So, and the reason I asked that is because I recently was speaking to my CPA and I was like, hey, so once, I'm starting this other business, should I start it as an individual LLC that's owned by me and my partner, or should I create an LLC and my ownership in the company is owned by my S corporation, or should I put it under my wife so that she's the one that goes to jail for it? Just kidding about that last part. But, the question was how do I want to structure my business? Do I need to change my S corp into a holdings company and then all the LLCs, all my businesses, all my property and everything is owned under that, or what's the best way? So he referred me off to a real estate lawyer, like, yeah, that makes sense. I'll talk to that person. He'll know the answer,
Yeah, I'd say we probably would do something similar with that. We would look at specifics that, we can't really give public legal advice, but
Of course.
we would ask specific questions to see the best way to structure that. But when it comes to structuring, our services are rather limited, I would say. So, we've helped sellers file for LLCs. That sounds a bit more complex. So in all likelihood, I would refer that to a specific business focused attorney that doesn't really deal with Amazon or just as far as structuring. There are attorneys that almost exclusively deal with that. So that's probably what I would do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in general,
But you know someone for that.
Yeah. We have a pretty large network. So for most things, I would say I could find someone that could help.
Yeah. So that's the point I was making, is that for anyone that's listening, you can go to David for your Amazon stuff, but then if you need to go beyond that, you can still go through David to find people that he trusts, right? So, because some of us make gobs and gobs of money in Amazon, right? And you don't, this is not legal, professional, or any advice at all. This is nefarious words. So, it's not even the right word. Never mind. Okay. Anyhow, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. If you're making a bunch of money, you don't necessarily want to take $1 million of profit and give the government 400 grand in taxes, right? So there are other things you can do with your money. That's why I was bringing that. Okay, let's get on to the actual purpose of this podcast, because I went way off topic there. So I want to start off with Amazon suspensions. All right. Now, there's a lot of reasons that you can be suspended for things. I've witnessed a number of them. I've been on the shit end of the stick of it, and I still don't know to this day why my account was suspended, and no Amazon employee that I have ever spoken to can tell me why I was suspended, and there were no performance notifications. So there can be a reason, and they typically give you a notification. Hey, you have been violating our TOS on review manipulation, blah, blah, blah. You can appeal this, you can do that, blah, blah, blah. Or in my case, I got no notifications, no performance notifications, no emails, nothing. And I was just suspended one day, and it took me 4 months to get it back. So how do you avoid Amazon suspensions, David?
Sure. So it's a pretty loaded question. Start with some of the basics. So For the newer sellers out there, I think the biggest thing to know is not to be naive and don't underestimate Amazon. A lot of times, if you're towing that line, more often than not, you're going to get caught. So sometimes you could sell a product really well for a month, sometimes several months. In the past, I've even seen it go on for years sometimes. But when Amazon flags it, if it's a significant enough issue, there's a chance you might never recover from it. You might never sell on that account ever again, or maybe even be banned from Amazon. So I think number one is really education, making sure that you're up to date on what Amazon, what do other sellers have issues with, right? So a common one is authenticity issues. If you're a reseller, what suppliers can you buy from? What suppliers can you not buy from? Now, if the supplier is legitimate, what are Amazon's requirements for invoices? There are sellers that have been in business for years, for example, that don't know the basic rules behind what Amazon is looking for. So I'd say
Well,
that's
Amazon doesn't exactly make it easy to find that stuff. And when you're getting started, like their terms of service are robust, right? And if something's wrong, they don't tell you how to fix it either. And they're almost never specific on what the issue is. But yeah, please
correct.
go on.
Correct. So when it comes to invoices, that's something that, you can do some digging and figure out what Amazon's basic requirements are. Amazon is not going to tell you a lot of them. You can find certain things, but I've seen sellers that are for months could be banging their head against a wall and they don't understand why Amazon's denying it. So
Yeah, I've been there.
right. So basic things to know is, does the supplier have an online web presence, right? Can you locate them? Is there any connection to the brand or connection to an authorized distributor? If you don't have that and you're reselling a product on Amazon, today it's going to be very difficult for you to be able to pass those reviews. So if Amazon flags it and you're buying from John Doe Incorporated, let's say you're reselling a Nike product, Amazon's going to say, well, we don't know who John Doe Incorporated is, right? If you can connect them with with one of Nike's distributors, now you have a full supply chain. So that's step one. And then you also have to make sure that your quantity exceeds the sales, right? So if you bought, let's say you sold 1,000 units, but the invoice you're providing only shows 10 units. Amazon's not going to tell you this, but that's not going to work. And they'll deny it just based on that. So in that instance, nothing to do with your supplier, actually, but Amazon will give you the same denial like it's a supplier problem.
Doesn't Amazon specifically ask you for a recent invoice when they make the request?
Within the last 365 days, yeah.
Okay, so they ask you for a recent invoice. And if you've still got inventory, let's say you were selling Nikes, right? You sold 1,000 units, you've got 50 of them left in stock, but you bought them 2 years ago. If you don't have a recent invoice but you bought 100 pair recently, right? And you only give them an invoice for that, they're going to decline it. And then there is no way for you to provide an invoice that meets their conditions.
Right. So it sounds crazy, right? It is a common issue that does come up from time to time. I'll say that. So in general, yes, perfect world, you have an invoice within the last year. Now, doesn't mean necessarily if you have proof in that example, you might be able to get it through, but Amazon will put you through the absolute ringer, right? So depending on how large that issue is, if it's, a small amount of inventory, or if it does result in an account suspension, then it's obviously serious. But if, let's say, Amazon's denying that and then also withholding, tens of thousands of dollars, maybe six figures, maybe seven figures, then that would be a strong case for arbitration. Because the invoices are over 365 days old, that's an Amazon requirement and maybe doesn't pass Amazon's review. You go to arbitration, arbitrator has a very different standard. What's the bottom line here? Are the products authentic, whether they were bought today, last year, or 10 years ago? Were they offered as advertised? So that one, if the appeals process doesn't work, there are other avenues and you probably would still be able to be successful, but it costs more money and certainly a lot.
Yeah. And so arbitration, is that handled by you if someone comes to you?
It is. So there's a couple of different options. So Sometimes sellers want to move forward pro se, so they represent themselves. They could file it. You don't need an attorney to do it. But we also do represent sellers in arbitrations, but it's very specific cases. And one of the main issues that I tell all sellers, and I've recorded my own content about this as well, is if you're only looking for account reinstatement, arbitration is not the way to go, because for a reason that's not going to work. You could try and go for it, but that should not be the only reason. Highly unlikely Amazon will reinstate the account because it's an at-will agreement. They could suspend you if they don't like the color of your hair.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's happened to me before. So, all right, good. What other, obviously, I mean, you said in the beginning it was a loaded question, how to avoid Amazon suspensions. The bottom line of what David is getting at here is you need to know what Amazon wants from you. And sometimes that takes not sometimes, it always takes deduction, right? You have to read the terms of service and then deduce, what does it actually mean? What does Amazon actually want? And then do your best to provide that, right? But when it comes to cases with Amazon through Seller Central or Brand Registry or Community Help or wherever, being succinct and only providing the data is a lot more effective than providing a whole bunch of emotion, right? Like whoever's reading your case, and David, back me up on this if I'm right. Back me up if I'm wrong either, so I sound smart, but let me know. If Amazon doesn't care when that case goes through, or you're working through a lawyer like David, they don't care that you have 3 children and that you're the sole breadwinner for your family. They don't give 2 shits about that. What they care about is their own image and their customers, which isn't you, right? Even though you're the one that makes them a lot of money, you're not their customer. The buyer is. So keeping the emotion out is going to help streamline things. Would you say you agree with that, David?
Absolutely. Yes. It's one of my top tips when writing appeals, just because we've seen it so much in the past that for whatever reason, sellers think that if you give them a sob story, it'll somehow move them. In my experience, it does absolutely nothing. You have to focus on what they're asking for. If you don't have the documentation, do your best to get it. Unfortunately, they don't care that, grandma's sick and that you have to go to the hospital, that, you're a single parent, you have 4 kids. No matter what you tell them, you're going to get the automatic denial. It's sad, but that's the truth.
True. Yeah. Yeah, Amazon's a corporation, not a person. No heart.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, cool. Let's talk about how to resolve suspensions.
Sure. So in the past, I would say Amazon always asks for a plan of action, right? So they'd always ask 3 components. They want a root cause, your corrective actions, so how you corrected this specific issue, and then your preventative measures, how you're going to avoid it in the future. So more of your long-term solution. Those still do exist today, but more than we've seen in the past. Amazon wants to see an actual dispute. So they don't necessarily just want you to identify what caused the problem. Now they want you to actually dispute the issue. So if someone filed a counterfeit complaint, they want you to say they're authentic. Here's my proof they are authentic. Sometimes they will ask for a plan of action, but sometimes they don't. And some sellers just blindly submit a plan of action, even when Amazon's not asking for it. So that's one of the reasons it's more difficult to provide a successful appeal, because Amazon isn't always interested in, okay, what caused the problem and what resolved it. Now they're like, okay, well, this is the issue. Are you denying it? Are you saying you were in compliance instead? So when that's not the case, it becomes more of an uphill battle than it's been in the past.
I see. So Amazon has transitioned to and it's pretty much always been this way, really, but guilty until proven innocent.
Always been that way. Yeah. They first ask questions later. So they'll say, oh, someone filed a counterfeit claim, even if it's without a test buy. And then they just look towards you to say, okay, no, it's not true. But the other side should really have the burden of proof of, okay, they filed a counterfeit claim. What's the proof that the product is actually counterfeit? then they should file the complaint. That's the right way to do it. But sometimes Amazon lets certain sellers get away with certain things, but that kind of ties in with, the topic we were just talking about, is making sure that also you're not one of these sellers that's doing, let's call it black hat or even gray hat tactics, where you're basically targeting some of your competitors without a basis. Amazon takes that very seriously. And if you get caught, it could be the end of your Amazon.
Yeah. So I had a situation very, very early on. This is probably 2012 or something like that, where I had reached out. So I was selling a supplement, right? I reached out to another seller who was violating a legal agreement with the manufacturer, right? I was representing the manufacturer of this product. And I reached out to them, unfortunately, on Amazon rather than directly through other means. And I said, hey, listen, your pricing model is violating MAP. So let's work together here to incrementally bring the price back up to MAP. That seller reported me, and then I got slapped for price fixing. No, not price fixing. What is it? Price manipulation or something like that.
Yeah. I've seen those notices. I've seen that exact situation. Were you able to resolve that?
Yeah. They just said, hey, I got a suspension. You're not allowed to sell because of price fixing. And I sent them, this is early days, 2012, something like that. Might have been 2011 even. And I said, no, this is not price fixing. This person is violating a legal contract. And I reached out to him and to tell him that he needs to bring the prices up. And at that time, that would never work today.
Nope.
Never.
Ended, and you probably wouldn't get back up and running to be.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That being said, it worked back then, right? Because I had a very strong stance. I can say, look, this seller is violating a legal contract, right? Today, I don't think so. I think you're right. I think I'd be possibly banned from Amazon, certainly suspended.
Oh yeah. It's a totally different time. I mean, I would say even in 2018 or so, things like that would happen. And, if someone filed a counterfeit claim or a customer was upset, something like that, you would almost automatically, you could provide them with not even an invoice. You could just essentially tell them, trust me, they're legitimate, and Amazon would. It was very more calm, more informal, more lax. Now it couldn't be more different.
Yeah. I like to say today that Amazon's a schizophrenic dictator.
I like that one. I haven't heard that one before.
Yeah. I mean, I at this point, I've got enough experience where I have and built enough of a network of sellers and agencies and companies and all that stuff, where I have seen something that they do that they get away with murder on, right? And whereas me, I can't, right? So an example of that, this is not getting away with murder. It's actually just being able to sell a product. So we were selling a sleep support sometime back in 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, something like that. We were selling a supplement, sleep support, and it had an ingredient in it that was not an ingredient that was banned by Amazon, but was spelled similarly, I don't know, maybe 30% of the word was the same. It started out the same, but ended differently. We weren't able to sell that product for an entire year. No matter how often we appealed this, we eventually went, all right, fine, screw it. It's just one of our vitamins. We've got lots of others, right? A year later, we find that supplement on Amazon, and we reach out to Amazon. We're like, hey, why is this seller able to sell it, but we are not? We're like, we've given you every shred of information showing that it's a perfectly legitimate product. It's not made out of rhinoceros horn or whatever the ingredient was, And the response was basically, oh, no, it's fine. Okay, so we started selling it again. So, schizophrenic dictator for sure today.
Honestly, I'm not surprised by that at all, because it's with Amazon, it's the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So Amazon can flag, that's a restricted product violation you got. And what happens is Amazon works in waves. So it can be, let's say, 1 month out of the year, for example, where Amazon is flagging all of their restricted products violations. Now, I don't know this exact specifics, other seller or sellers that listed, but for example, they could have listed that product a month later, right? A month after Amazon did all their sweeps, or a month after the FDA or the EPA got in contact with them and said, hey, Amazon, you got to do something about all of these issues that are violating federal regulations, right? I've seen it happen. Same scenario. I've seen that happen. And then a year later, all of a sudden, they either let you back on. There's not really any fairness to it. And I've had sellers,
Man.
almost have to play part-time therapist, if you will, and explain that, look, they don't have data against you. It is unfair, and I agree it's unfair, but also pointing to the, why can they do this in general, at least today, and this isn't that new either for the last, I'd say, good 4 or 5 years, pointing to the other seller and saying, hey, they're selling the same thing. Why can they sell it? And why can't we if it's the same item? Also doesn't work for Amazon. So you can add that to the list with emotional appeals. Bring sellers, don't even bother. It's not going to help.
You know what you just made me think of is like, so I'm in the review removal business, right? And that's a touchy, I shouldn't say it's touchy. It could be a touchy subject with Amazon because Amazon's really hard on not having review manipulation, right? Which makes perfect sense to me. I agree with that 100%. But also they don't want to admit that there are reviews that violate their policies and are review manipulation, right? Even though it's been estimated that I think it's like 30 or 40% of the reviews on Amazon are just full-blown pork and beef baloney, But I see this in the review sector. Even the cases that I'm filing, they can be removed in waves sometimes. So it makes a lot of sense. I think that Amazon probably just has to operate that way. They have such an enormous amount of data, and there has to be some human elements involved somehow. Otherwise, you get mass bans, mass suspensions, right? Like the last one I remember was the pesticides, right? Flagging products for pesticides. Like I sell a blanket, a camping blanket, and like, you've got pesticides in here. I'm like, what are you? No. And I know tons of people that got flagged for pesticides. That's what happens when Amazon just goes, let's do a search for this and then ban those people.
Yep. And just to piggyback off of that, we had a guy who I believe he was selling a book, and either the title or maybe it was on the cover. I think it was in the title where there was some insect on the title, removed the listing or many listings, I think it was, for selling pesticides and violating the policy. So they make plenty.
Makes perfect sense.
Right. So that's something else where sometimes people just give up if it's, kind of like what happened with you where you were down for a year for that one, but because certain point.
Yeah, 4 months, but it was all 4 of my Seller Central accounts. Like
gotcha.
I couldn't not get back up, but yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Right. So that was the suspension. Didn't you say for the
The sleep supplement.
The account suspension, you're less likely to give that up so quickly, for obvious reasons. But with certain listings, at certain points, some sellers just get frustrated and they're throwing more money at it. And they're like, okay, let's just sell them the product. So persistence, I would say, is key. But that was just a funny example since you brought up pesticides, which is, haven't seen too many of those actually of late. But those were probably, I would say, in the top 3 of restricted products violations were pesticide related.
Yep. Like my camping blankets because, yeah. All right, sweet. Cool. That's been great. So let's talk about Amazon withholding money. It's happened to me before, but not for an extraordinarily long time. It hasn't happened in like a decade or something like that. In fact, I think that the time that they withheld my money is when they were accusing me of price fixing, right? Now, I've got legacy accounts. Like today, if you go and you create an account on Amazon, Amazon's going to withhold a percentage of your money. It makes it hard to do books, I hear. I would hate it personally because when we get a payout, we look at the sales, blah, blah, blah. We pay our vendor, right? But Amazon withholds a portion of your money to begin with on accounts these days. But what happens if they're just not going to pay you? Because as you said earlier, you sign away your right to sue Amazon for money. It has to go through arbitration. So what do we do if Amazon's withholding money?
Sure. Usually it's a pretty rough situation. So a lot of times if an account is suspended, Amazon will also withhold funds. Sometimes, maybe even more often than not, the seller cares more about the funds that were already earned funds, right? So these are sales already generated. The money's in the account. All it has to be is sent to the seller that they, most of the time lawfully sold. Sometimes it's, funny business.
Yeah, let's talk about the lawfully side of things. Because honestly, I feel that if they're doing something illegal, they deserve to get smacked around.
I agree. I agree. So there's all different scenarios, right? But let's assume it was done by the book, sales are legit, right? So the first step is contacting Amazon Disbursements or the fund's appeal team. So you draft up an appeal, you contact a specific team. Nowadays, they usually say it's not appealable, the funds, until 90 days after. Normally, they pay you every
Of
2.
course.
Now, in a lot of instances, I see they hold you off for 90 days until after the account suspension. So you first try and reinstate the account. If you reinstate the account, Amazon will also release the funds. Say you can't, got to wait the 90-day period. Then you draft a funds appeal. You submit it to them. Now, Amazon makes a decision. Let's say they deny it. The next step generally, again, partially depends on how much Amazon's withholding. But the next step, what we typically do is we write a legal letter to Amazon's outside counsel, right? So they're represented by a huge law firm. I think it's the biggest one in the country. We have to mail them the letter. It goes to Seattle, and we wait for them to reply. A classic situation is, let's say Amazon withholds $100,000 and they're pointing to one ASIN, one listing, okay? The seller, let's say in that example, only sold $1,000 worth of that one ASIN. So naturally, doesn't it make sense that if that ASIN is in dispute, shouldn't Amazon release the $99,000 of everything else that was sold? They're telling you they only had a problem with one ASIN. Generally speaking, that's what the argument is when it's only one product violation. It's very often to justify withholding all funds because so many other products were sold, right? So we contact Amazon's outside counsel, and then we wait for a response. The idea is it's essentially a pre-arbitration letter. It's essentially trying to resolve the matter before we formally file. So we have a decent
A
relationship.
settlement, so to speak, in layman's terms.
In layman's terms, yeah, a settlement, right? It works better for the seller because it's cheaper and it's a lot quicker than going through the whole process. You have to spend, a good amount of money. It's not as expensive as litigation, but it's a suitable next step to see if we can resolve it. Now, in response, they're either going to say, you're right, here's the money, or they're going to say, no, we consider this matter closed. And in those instances, then we have to have another conversation about actually filing for arbitration. So you have to file the demand. It's like filing a lawsuit, except it's more informal, it's quicker, and it's cheaper. So then
sorry, go ahead.
That's it. Then you file demand, and then you're in the arbitration phase.
Okay. So I've actually been part of an arbitration once with a car that I bought from Volkswagen. And so I've been at an arbitration table with Volkswagen before. So if I remember correctly, this is a long time ago. I was still a dumb kid back then, but I did have a legitimate transmission issue that they refused to resolve. Anyhow, if I remember correctly, if you go into arbitration, you just go into a conference room. There's a representative of you or you yourself. There's a representative of Amazon in this case. And then there is an arbitration officer or do you call them arbiters? No, not arbiters. Arbitrator. Thank you. Arbitrator is something else. So you've got your arbitrator and it's just a conversation. It's like counseling and you come to an agreement. Is that correct? Roughly?
That sounds a little bit more like mediation. There are subtle differences between the two. Arbitration is more adversarial. Mediation is more, call it a meeting of trying to get to a meeting of the minds.
Okay, I was in mediation then. All right.
It sounds like
okay.
It. Sounds like
yep.
it. Oh,
yeah.
Similar, but slightly different word for it. But yeah, it sounds like that.
Okay. Okay. So then walk us through a little bit of how would an arbitration go?
Sure. So the initial step is you file the demand for arbitration, and then you have to pay the filing fees, and then you wait for them to confirm, right? Eventually, you select an arbitrator, right? There's an arbitrator selection process. We do it, and then Amazon does it, and then ultimately, there's a decision that's made, usually somewhere in the middle.
You agree on an individual, right?
Correct. That's
okay.
Yeah. So they're going to, of course, try and go for someone who has a history or around in representing large businesses, large corporations. We're on the other end of it. We want someone who has an interest in small businesses. And by the way, we also don't want them based in Seattle, right? Amazon,
Right.
we don't want to be in their playground. So usually it ends up somewhere in the middle nowadays. So let's call it middle America somewhere. We're on the East Coast here. Seattle's all the way West Coast.
Yeah.
We go for someone in the middle. So it's a bit more fair. Nowadays, it's typically done remotely. There are
Okay, I was going to ask.
speakers that still are old school that want a hearing, but it's really more expensive for everybody. You got to fly, you got to spend money in hotel rooms, and it's also just kind of unnecessary. So most of the time it's done telephonically.
Okay.
And there's a few stages to it. So there's a preliminary hearing after the arbitrator selection. That's really just scheduling, right? If you have any witnesses, you might have to depose people, depending on the situation. And then the final trial, if you will, is the formal hearing, and the arbitrator is present, and basically both sides present their case, and the arbitrator comes to a decision for who's in the right and whether Amazon is obligated to return your funds.
Right on. Okay, awesome. This is super helpful, David. I love this. I've never had these conversation with anybody before. So it's like, this is really enlightening to me. And I hope it's also very enlightening to others, because this area for me has always been a bit of a mystery. And I've always been more of a do-it-myself kind of guy until recently, when I've realized the value of my time investing into something versus paying a professional who already knows the answer, right? Or knows the solution.
I hear you. I'm in the same boat with things that I'm not, super up to speed on. And I've done that where I've spent hours of looking into things completely unrelated to this in general. And I'm just like, let me just call someone who's done this before. Could tell me probably 60 seconds. So totally
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, I've got a house that's in Florida, built in 1922. I didn't want to pay for an electrician, so I did it myself, And then I had a buddy come over and was like, "Hey, that's illegal. That's against code." Like, "What do you mean? I've got wire nuts on there." It's like, "Yeah, it needs to be in a box, dude." Like, I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool. Guess I'll put it in a box then." So, yeah. All right, sweet. That's great. And now let's go into IP complaints. So I want to address two things here, or cover two things here. How do you, as the seller, handle or address IP complaints against you? And how do you enforce them against somebody else? Let's start with somebody, because we know this happens. This is mostly, I don't know if it's necessarily resellers. No, it's white label as well, private label sellers. So how do you handle someone how do you know? What's the notification you get when you have an IP violation? Does it come from Amazon, or does it come from a law firm, or could it be either or? And then how do you handle it?
Sure. So I'll answer both. So usually when you get an IP complaint, specifically, it's something that's formally filed with Amazon from another party. So you get a notification or an email, sometimes both. Sometimes before that's even filed, if the brand, for example, is represented by a law firm, you'll get a cease and desist letter essentially warning you of an IP complaint. So sometimes they won't. If it's a smaller company, if it doesn't have counsel, sometimes they'll just file it on their own. So once you get the IP complaint, then it depends on the specific circumstances. So you have to review the specific complaint, right? So I always bring up counterfeit because it's very easy to kind of just analyze right on its face. If someone files a counterfeit claim, the product is either authentic or it's not, right? There's not really much of a gray area for the most part when it's a counterfeit accusation, right? You could say it's gray market or it's below MAP or all these things. Is the product legitimate? For example, so it's counterfeit. Let's say it's a counterfeit Nike. Let's stick with Nike with our example. Now, if, for example, the reseller has an authorized distributor invoice, we know the product's not counterfeit. So it's pretty straightforward. And in those instances, you draft a rights owner letter, you contact whoever filed it, so Nike in this example, and essentially state that this is a baseless complaint. We have proof behind it. If you don't have proof, we highly suggest you retract it. Otherwise, you're subject to damages. And in that case, they would be defamation per se, for example, if they knowingly filed the complaint, and tortious interference, right, with your contract on just for starters.
Let's take that up a second.
Yeah.
So I get an IP complaint for some Nikes from another seller, right? I'm legit, right? I can prove that I'm legit. So you're saying now that you as my representative can go return to the brand and say, hey, you owe us damages. Is that right?
Well, yes, but that's not really what the ultimate goal generally is. Now it's more of, because let's say it's filed today, right? Your damages are not going to be very high. I mean, there are some large resellers out there. So if you're down a week, it could mean a lot of money.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at here.
So yes, you can do that. Normally, the ultimate goal for most sellers is get a retraction, get the product back up as soon as possible. So if you are down and it is a baseless complaint, that's an added layer to it. But the answer is yes. If someone filed a counterfeit complaint and you have proof the item is authentic, you certainly have legal claims against them because it's up to them. They have the burden of proof of showing that the item is counterfeit. So if they didn't do their due diligence and are just clicking buttons because you're not authorized or you're selling the product for under MAP pricing, that's not a good enough answer. They need to have a strong basis behind why. Now, if they were mistaken, for example, it's something else. But for the most part, they filed a counterfeit claim. They better have proof that they filed it. Otherwise, it's not a one-way street. It's not just all of a sudden it's on you. They have to find it. So sellers that are rather large can go after them for damages, depending on, it's not always worth it, but they certainly can.
Yeah. So let's say I lost $100,000 in sales. What would your advice? Well, you can't give public advice. Let's see. Okay, go ahead. What would you do?
So if it was, okay, so $100,000 worth of damage, right? So the first thing, usually when these issues come up, if you waited long enough that it cost you $100,000, you probably made a mistake. And if you're that large of a seller, I would say,
I'm that large of a seller.
Right. I would say should have handled it like immediately. So you get an IP complaint, you can't resolve it. You could try and resolve it on your own. They don't listen. You're that big of a seller. You should be retaining counsel. Don't let it get bad enough that that's the damage, right?
But that could be just 1 week.
It could
be. Easily.
Correct.
Easily.
Correct. So in those instances, you want to get in touch with the party that filed it. And if you're ready to go and you have the funds to move forward, I talked about arbitration earlier. That's just against Amazon. You're bound to move forward with arbitration, not seller to seller. You could them in a formal court of law, traditional court, and take it from there. So you do have rights. So if they cost you $100,000 worth of sales, we could show it's baseless. You have a pretty strong claim. Yeah.
Okay. And then I would just have to be willing to invest that time and more money to then get that out. And maybe we don't even know that seller has that money to reimburse me.
Correct. You have to do that search. You got to make sure that they have the funds. You also have to, consider how expensive and how much time it's going to take. That's why it's best to just try and get a retraction first. You're also obligated to try and cure it, right? So by cure it, meaning reach out, try and stop the bleeding, get a retraction. You can't just let it go on for 3 years and then claim, oh, I lost $9 million. If you never reached out, then it's a bad faith argument.
Got it. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Now, how do you enforce your own IP?
Right. So on the other side of it, it's registering your IP first off, right? So if you file for a trademark application, you get a serial number. You can then enroll in Amazon's brand registry program, and then you can begin enforcing it, right?
And you help with this, don't you?
We do. Yes, we do. So this is, we do it the right way where we send out cease and desist letters first, right? There are lots of honest Amazon sellers out there. So if they think they're infringing, they will remove the product. But again, it can't be baseless. There are lots of templates out there that essentially say you're not authorized, so you have to stop selling. Not how the law works. There are exceptions, but if someone's buying a product and reselling it, as long as it's legitimate and it's not altered, they are within their right to resell the product. Otherwise, everyone would be able to monopolize the market, right? There would be resellers, right?
Well, let's say this is private label.
Even still, even if I have a private label brand, right? So say I'm David's brand. That's my brand, right? And you somehow are able to buy from one of my authorized distributors. I don't know who you are, but I sell it to an authorized distributor who then sells it to you and you sell it on Amazon. A classic scenario is me as the brand files against you simply because I don't know who you are. And I want the distribution chains tied so I know where all of the sales are going. right? He's also pleased. It's also about pleasing the authorized distributor. So that's another side of it. But I can't just file a complaint and simply state, wait, you're not authorized to sell my brand. That doesn't matter because you bought it from an authorized party. You get, it's called first sale doctrine, right? The first
What
sale
is it?
Me, first sale doctrine, which means the first sale is from me to the authorized distributor. Now the rights go away. There are exceptions. We're talking general rule without getting too complex. That's the first sale. Now for like, let's call it something different for a second, right? Let's say I didn't sell the product to anyone. I've seen cases where there was a stolen goods ring, for example, right? Someone off of a truck, right? And a seller buys the product, for example, and they don't know exactly where the products were coming from. It happens a lot. Let's say it turned out that the products were stolen. Now you're not within the first sale doctrine. Why? Because there was no first sale. I didn't sell it to anyone, right? I sent it on a truck to my distributor. Someone stole the product and then gave them to you in this example. There's no first sale doctrine. Now you are infringing on a trademark. So there's a little, it's a little convoluted, but the bottom line is, as a reseller, you just need to look out for who you're buying from, right? On the Amazon side and legally. But generally speaking, if you buy a legitimate product, you're not altering it any way, and you're selling it as the brand sells it, right? Then you should be fine. But that doesn't mean IP disputes don't come up.
Right. Okay, cool. All right, sweet. Well, good. David, let's see, where can people find you?
Sure. So they can find us on our website. So it's damlawfirm.com, or they can find us on any of our social media channels. It's at David Miller E-commerce Lawyer or at David Allen Miller Law. And we're on YouTube, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok, Facebook, and
all the socials.
Just my name. So David Miller. So any of those channels would work.
Awesome. Yeah. And I did put the video or the link up earlier on this to his YouTube channel where he does a whole bunch of shorts about Amazon law and, whatever he does. That's lolly. That's an official term, right? Lolly videos. Yeah. Legal stuff.
Let's go with
legalese. Yeah, cool. So, all right. damlawfirm.com, right?
You got it.
Cool. All right, David, thank you so much for being on here. This was really enlightening to me. It's just an area I have never even delved into in all my years on Amazon, which actually, now that I think about it, sounds strange to even me, but yeah, this has been great. Thank you so much for being on the show, and damlawfirm.com, and I'll see you when.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me.
All right, buddy. See ya.